Hello everyone, I'm Jen and I make useful English Lit study videos on Shakespeare, poetry, fiction, literary ideas and more to help you become a literary expert. So if that sounds like what you need, make sure you hit the subscribe button below. So in today's video, we are analysing the ending of Virginia Woolf's novel Mrs Dalloway, specifically the final moment when Clarissa, who is hosting her dinner party, hears from Lady Bradshaw about Septimus Smith's death. As she observes the party attendees, her mind also wanders in and out of the present moment to reflect on the state of her marriage, relationships, and the meaning of life and death. It's an especially poignant and complex moment because Clarissa's party is supposed to be this joyous, life-affirming event, celebrating the coming together of friends and acquaintances in the same space. But in this very moment, Clarissa finds herself musing on death and somewhat perversely and paradoxically considers that dying isn't perhaps the strongest affirmation of living. Because, well, what allows death to happen is, of course, the condition of one's aliveness in the first place. So even while the surface atmosphere at Clarissa's dinner party appears convivial, we get a sense that there is a deep, throbbing undercurrent of pensive, wistful melancholy through Clarissa's interior monologue. Now, one of the most intriguing things about Mrs Dalloway, the novel, and stream of consciousness novels in general actually, is the stark contrast between minimal external activity and abundant internal mental activity. For instance, in Mrs Dalloway, nothing really happens except for Clarissa's hosting a dinner party, preparing for it, and Septimus's suicide. But otherwise, most of the action in the narrative occurs entirely within the headspace of Clarissa and Septimus. Yet the narrative is complex and chaotic at points because that, well, precisely mirrors the nature of human thought. Likewise, in the ending of this novel, this contrasting framework of seeming lull in the outside world versus frantic energy in the inner mind is evident when Clarissa, despite quietly observing her guests mingling and tarrying about in her home, finds that her mind veers from outrage over hearing about Septimus's suicide to pensiveness about the nature of life and death, from the present realization of Septimus's death to dipping into the past moments of her encounters with other characters in her life, like Peter Walsh and Sally Seton, from the melancholy of acknowledging the presence and reminder of death, albeit vicariously through hearing about someone's suicide at her party, and the relief of, or perhaps even bliss, of acknowledging the security and comfort of her life. So anyway, in the rest of this video, I'm going to be diving into the specific parts of this final moment as we explore the implications of the nooks and crannies of Clarissa's thoughts. So with that, let's dive straight into it. Now, if you've studied literature for long enough, or if you've observed humans around you, or if you've watched enough of my character analysis videos, you probably know that humans are contradictory characters, and that our actions may not always square with our intentions or beliefs. Clarissa Dalloway exhibits this dichotomy, as when she reacts with outrage upon hearing from Lady Bradshaw that a young man had killed herself, finding it crude and uncouth as party conversation topic, as she thinks, what business had the Bradshaws to talk of death at her party, and the Bradshaws talked of it at her party. And yet, Clarissa finds herself attracted to the thought of Septimus having so blatantly given up on his life, and then musing at length about precisely the topic of death, and dwelling on it more and more as her mind wanders into contemplative, philosophical territory. Clarissa asks herself the futile, unknowable question of why had he done it? And then considers whether there is, after all, a case to be made for suicide when so much of life is intolerable, which he thinks is made all the more intolerable by pious narcissists like Dr. William Bradshaw. And that's a great point of irony, because Septimus partly commits suicide because Bradshaw, as his psychiatrist, refuses to engage with him as a human being who has complex, unique individual needs, and instead makes life intolerable for Septimus by forcing him to stay at a psychiatric ward. By the way, guys, if you find this video helpful so far, I'd massively appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on any of my top grade lit study content going forward. I'd also encourage you to check out my membership program by clicking the join button below if you want exclusive access to members only study content and make special video requests. I'll see you there. And yet, Clarissa finds herself seduced by thoughts of morbidity, as she imagines some of these gory specifics of the moment when Septimus dies, as reflected in the vivid sensory imagery of descriptions like, "Up had flashed the ground, through him, blundering, bruising, went the rusty spikes. There he lay with a thud, thud, thud in his brain." So even as Clarissa's conscious mind reacts with shock to the sharing of the news because it violates our understanding of social propriety, her subconscious pulls her towards the prospect of savouring darker thoughts and entertaining morbid ideas. Now, earlier I had mentioned that a key framing logic in this novel is the contrast between the outwardly visible and the inwardly felt. What is discernible to the eye in terms of Clarissa's public life versus what's invisible to others in Clarissa's private mind. One point of distinction worth commenting on here is the way Clarissa ruminates on such abstract, high-minded topics like existentialism and the meaning of life and death, yet at the same time registering that she has such mental and emotional capacity to contemplate on such things precisely because her survival and practical needs are more than cared for by having married someone like Richard, whose financial stability and social standing have enabled a materially comfortable lifestyle for them. And this in turn frees up space for Clarissa to delight in losing herself in the process of living to find it, and to have the luxury of looking at the sky or seeing it between people's shoulders at dinner. So despite whatever niggling remorse Clarissa may have felt at points about not pursuing a more exciting romance with someone like Peter Walsh, she realizes by now that all things considered, a stable, albeit dull marriage with the reliable Richard is a much better deal for her than a potentially turbulent and exploitative relationship with someone like Peter, who we eventually find out is motivated, at least in part, by monetary needs to reconnect with Clarissa after all these years. So there's a poignant but important irony in the fact that Clarissa's dreamy philosophizing reinforces her appreciation for pragmatism, as she recognizes that without the creature comforts of an upper-class English lifestyle, she wouldn't even have the time or freedom to immerse or experience for herself in the sights and sounds of her surroundings. Towards the end of the novel, there is something slightly unsettling but incredibly moving about Clarissa's decision to take deep pleasure in the mundane granularities of her observations in the fresh awareness of Septimus's suicide. Yet in this juxtaposition of consciously choosing joy for herself while inevitably feeling the pain of another, we see that joy and pain are not mutually exclusive, and that perhaps the simultaneous experiencing of these emotions is what characterizes most of life anyway. We also recognize that despite Clarissa's limited social clout in her role as a wife and homemaker, she possesses a kind of mental and emotional agency that grants her a unique kind of power in this world, where she feels free enough to choose happiness over anguish, gratitude over resentment, and acceptance over frustration about the state of the world, simply by immersing herself truly and deeply in her immediate environs. As she notices the solemn sky, a dusky sky, she registers its cheek in beauty, and the subtle but magical shifts in hue into ashen pale raced over quickly by tapering vast clouds. The personification here highlighting that she sees signs of life everywhere, even in what is inanimate. And as she observes the old lady in the room opposite going to bed, she finds even what's supposedly the most pedestrian event of someone turning in to be a fascinating incident. So what's interesting too is that with Clarissa's voyeuristic observation of the old lady's turning in, she is perhaps reminded by the notion of sleep that death is but a version of life in slumber, and that the gulf between living and dying is perhaps much closer than one would often think. Indeed, this porousness between life and death is dramatized by the Shakespearean allusions that follow, as she considers that the old lady had put out her light, which is an allusion to Othello at the point where he prepares to murder his wife Desdemona in her sleep, and of course her favorite mantra, "Fear no more the heat of the sun," from Cymbeline, which offers a reassurance that upon dying, one is ultimately liberated from all earthly influences, and as such, in a way, truly and completely free. So as paradoxical as it sounds then, it's the shock of hearing about Septimus's death that rejuvenates Clarissa's sense of vitality and thirst for life, which is why, as callous as it may literally sound, she felt glad that he had done it, thrown it, i.e. life away, because in his dying she recognizes for herself just how precious and pleasurable her own life is, and how much more of life there is to be lived. Clarissa then is the anti-nihilist against Septimus's utter existentialist despair, and with his sweeping abandonment of all that life can offer him, he made her feel the beauty, made her feel the fun of it all, from the numinous vibrations of the leaden circles dissolving in the air, to the lifelong connections she recalls having made with people like Sally and Peter, whom she now recognizes she must go back and assemble and find. And there you have it, guys. That's my close reading analysis of the final moments in Mrs Dalloway, which I find to be a deeply, deeply moving and poetic piece of writing. I hope my analysis has inspired you to read the passage and the novel in a new, refreshing light, and that you find the ideas here useful and unique for your own thinking and studying of the novel. Now for your next video, if you haven't already, I recommend you watch my analysis on the opening passage to Mrs Dalloway, which will provide a nice framing analysis in light of this video's content. Otherwise, you can watch my explainer on the context of modernist literature, which is going to give you a broad overview of the historical and social and cultural circumstances influencing this novel. As always, hit that thumbs up button below if you found this video helpful in any way, so that the YouTube algorithm will spread it to other passionate lit learners like yourself all around the world, and that you can inspire me to keep making these useful lit study content for you in the future. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and switch on that bell notification below so you never miss out on my weekly videos. And you can also join my membership program for exclusive video requests and essay review perks, and click the join button below to find out more. Thanks for watching as always, and I will see you in the next one.